The sanctuary was in chaos. It took everything Edo Phoenix had just to stay standing with all of the intense emotions bombarding him from every side. He felt like he was going to be sick. It wasn't just the emotions either. Not just the mixed-up, sickening cocktail of fear and anger and nerves and frustration that assaulted his brain as though they were his own feelings. No, it was the situation. The Emperor is gone. His heart thrummed in his throat as he flashed down the halls of the outer sanctuary, past streaking blurs of crimson as priests started back and forth, arms full of enchanting scrolls and demon bracers and demon weapons. There was no time for decorum, and he waved off anyone who attempted to pause to bow to him. There wasn't time for that. The Emperor had to be found. What could have happened, he thought, his heart in his throat choking him. I was right there. He had just vanished. He was guarded with way too many wards for any outside magic to have an effect on him, so no one could have teleported him with an enchanting scroll. The only thought Edo could come up with was, there's a traitor in our midst, but the very idea seemed preposterous. The only people close enough to have taken the Emperor were himself, his attendants Grace and Gloria, High Priest Roger, and Roger's attendants, Barrett and Asuka. Both pairs were hand-picked by him and Roger themselves. They wouldn't be false. So then how? Edo pushed around the corner and through the doors that took him into the courtyard. There was a large space between the inner and outer sanctuaries, characterized by the carefully attended gardens in the style of the Zarkanian doctrine. No plants grew in this garden, save for carefully cultured black trees that were enchanted to never bloom, twisted into careful shapes with wires to make them look like claws. They grew between patches of raked gravel and large boulders set in special arrangements. All was meant to remind the mind of the inevitability and acceptance of death, that all things must end. Edo tried to remind himself of the doctrines as he took the path to the inner sanctuary, but even that failed to calm him today. His god was gone, stolen, lost, and who knew where he could be? He was alive, certainly, for no mortal could kill a god. But what would the heathen world outside try to do to him? No, he must remain calm. There was no easy way out of this city. He would be found. He would be found. By passing his bracer before the lock, and the recognition clicked it open. Inside, the heavily draped dark red halls of the inner sanctuary admitted him, and he closed the doors behind him. He made his way down the halls, through more waves of priests and servants, all the way down to the throne room, and opened this door with his bracer as well. How long would the power in this metal last, he wondered. They were working on forging more of the special black metal tools in the outer sanctuary, but without their god to bless them regularly, they would drain. He tried to restrain his own emotions, calm himself. He needed to find his center so that he could focus. After he had breathed in a few times, drawing himself back to himself and re-blocking out most of the emotional barrage from the world around him, he passed through the doors into the throne room. The throne room was a magnificent display of architecture. Large pillars the color of old blood lined both ends, holding up the faraway ceiling, so tall that the torchlight could not reach it and sending it into a mysterious darkness. The black marble floor had been polished to a perfect smoky brilliance, with the long red carpet leading from the doors all the way up to the dais, where the black throne, carved to look like the dying trees in the gardens, sat watching everything. Edo's heart tightened again. For the first time since he had been in this room, the throne lay empty. They never gathered the council here without the Emperor presiding. This was a state of emergency that Edo had never prepared for. His compatriots were already gathered, some of them huddled in groups of their own and whispering. A handful of servants were in attendance, which was against protocol. They weren't necessarily supposed to be present, but then again, this was an emergency, and they might need to be sending and receiving messages as the meeting continued. Roger looked up from where he was speaking to Priest Barrett, giving Edo a tight-lipped smile. Even Edo's composure could not completely blot out the man's stab of disgust. Roger didn't like Edo. Edo didn't like Roger much either. The man was far too political, too power-hungry to be an adequate servant of their god. There was too much ambition in him. The doctrines of Zarkania demanded one forego all ambition, as all things would eventually end. "So good you could join us," Roger said in his normally bland fashion. "I was hearing reports from my patrols in the city," Edo said. "They have not yet found anything, but there was some disturbance at the western gate that they are investigating now. A handful of individuals without proper documentation managed to escape." More whispers ran around the room. "The Emperor," someone asked. "Did they have the Emperor?" "How could they just walk out of the city with our god?" someone else said, their voice almost cracking. Roger held up a hand for silence and the room calmed down. He beckoned Edo, and Edo moved forward, taking his appropriate place next to Roger. Grace and Gloria were already here, and they fell into place at Edo's left. Roger had Barrett and Asuka with him on his right, and the other priests of the council moved silently to their places until they were all standing in a circle. Roger cleared his throat. "As you all know," he said, "the Emperor has disappeared. We suspect some rebellion scum may have kidnapped him." "For what purpose?" one member asked. "The theories are many, and we don't have time to look through them," Edo said. "They might simply want a bargaining chip, or perhaps they learned our weaponry drains its power without its blessings from his grace." A few brief murmurs sprouted up among the group, but silenced as Edo held up his hands. It was so hard to think. Emotions were running high among everyone, and his head hurt trying to block them out. "We don't have time to discuss the whys, only the how," Edo said, as in, how we will find and rescue His Majesty from those who have stolen him. He turned his eyes to a young man with dark hair and eyes. "Priest Manjome, have the location scrolls turned up anything?" Manjome looked irritated as he clenched his jaw, and Edo felt a wave of frustration from him. "Nothing," he said. "All our attempts at divining his location have turned up nothing." Edo tightened his jaw. That meant, more than anything, that someone was using magic, perhaps a scroll of their own, to block their divination. It was a powerful scroll or mage indeed who could hide from the combined efforts of our Zicanian priests. "My most recent patrols have turned up nothing as well," he said. "But we haven't searched every corner of the slums yet. We will find him." "And the public? What do they know of the accident?" Roger said, eyes leveled at Edo. "We have informed the public that martial law is in order until the terrorist who sets the fire came forward," Edo said. "As far as I am aware, no one knows that the Emperor is missing yet. We have put out a statement that he is being kept safely within the walls until the remaining terrorists have been executed." Roger nodded once sharply. The door creaked open slightly, and a tiny red-robed acolyte slipped through. Edo recognized him as Sora, his apprentice. It was common for even high priests to take on specific acolytes as their apprentices. Sora was a bit of a handful, but his blessing was powerful, and he had a very quick mind. If not for his independent streak of skepticism, he would make for a fine priest. Sora slipped through the shadows, going around the pillars until he reached Edo's back, passing him a piece of paper into his hand. Edo took it and glanced over the contents. His chest tightened. "I have a report from the Western Gate," he said. "Brief descriptions of those who have escaped have been made. There were 5 of them, and one of them was a young man, about the age and size of the Emperor." Whispers blew up around the room, and no amount of holding up hands from Roger got it to silence. Edo crumpled the paper in one fist. His own emotions were bad enough without all the rest jumbled up in his head. His god had been kidnapped by heathens. He felt his chest doing strange, clenching things just thinking about it. What did they plan to do with him? What kind of heretics could they be to take up arms against him? He tried to still the tremble in his arms. He was no easily frightened acolyte anymore. He was the high priest of the outer sanctuary. Despite his own turmoil, he had to remain a pillar of strength for the rest of his fold. "We cannot be sure it was truly the Emperor," Roger said. "However, I do recommend we send a team after them." Edo nodded. Roger's eyes moved out to the group. "As much as it pains me to say, we cannot trust just anyone," he said. "His Majesty was removed from our midst while surrounded by his priests. It is outside the normal protocol, but I want volunteers from the council itself to seek and rescue the Emperor." A few more bursts of whispers. Edo's heart ached. He wanted to go. He wanted to go find the Emperor, to rescue him as once the Emperor had rescued him. He felt like a child again, kneeling on the cold marble floor with the other priest initiates, his heart thrumming in his ears during the entire vigil and ceremony, with the Emperor looking over him. If not for the Emperor, if not for him, Edo would have killed himself a long time ago. He closed his eyes to restrain himself. As much as he wanted to, he knew he could not. The outer sanctuary needed him to maintain order and protect the believers. "If it pleases this council, I volunteer," said a breathy voice beside him. Edo opened his eyes. It was Grace, he realized. She leaned forward, her silver hair sliding over her shoulders like platinum wires, green eyes alight with fervor. "My Lord High Priest," she said to Edo, her eyes on him as she dropped to one knee. "I know it is presumptuous, as I am your attendant, but please, allow me to do this for my lord. I will see him safely back to the sanctuary, I swear upon my grave." Her emotions were full of such fervor and devotion that Edo almost cried. He smiled, leaning down to put his hands on her shoulders. "I would trust no one more," he said. He looked up at the council. "Do we have approval?" It did not take long for the others to raise their hands in approval, hands shooting up faster than Edo could have dreamed for. Gloria knelt then all at once, her eyes lifted to Edo. "Perhaps I ask too much, but I would accompany my sister," she said. "I also volunteer." The voice was quiet, but it caught Edo's attention easily. It came from the woman with the blonde hair in a braid on Roger's right. She dropped to one knee as well, eyes on Roger. "I wish to serve the Emperor as well," she said. "Let me join them in the quest to find him." It was hard to pinpoint any one set of emotions in this room full of anger and fear and concern, but Edo's stomach twisted. What was this feeling of dread that he got from her? Snippets of anger and rage seemed to float through her head. Was she angry that the Emperor was missing too, like he was? He couldn't tell, but he felt uneasy. "Priestess Tenjoin, isn't it?" Edo said. "Yes, my Lord High Priest," she said. Roger smiled then, and Edo felt his throat clench. Politics. Asuka was one of Edo's priestesses from the outer circle, but Roger had been favoring her lately, probably with the intent on initiating her into the inner circle. At this point, only Edo's top attendants had made any volunteer. It was, of course, out of their devotion, but to Roger it would look like Edo pushing his hand. Damn this man. He would turn even the fate of their missing god into a way to solidify his political power. Well, as long as it returned the Emperor safely to the sanctuary, Edo would deal with it. "Do we accept this trio?" Roger said. "Do we place our trust in our brethren for the time being?" It was a little slower than Grace's approval, but after a few moments the majority passed. Grace shot to her feet, with Gloria and Asuka close behind her. She reached for Edo's hand, holding it briefly and bowing deeply. "I will not fail, my Lord High Priest," she said. "I trust the three of you with your fate of His Majesty," Edo said, squeezing her hand back. "May death wait until you have completed your duty." "And may death wait until you have completed yours," Grace and Gloria said back. Asuka repeated the farewell quietly a beat after the other two. Edo frowned briefly, but he let it pass. He would just have to trust. For now, that was all he could do. Trust in his faith and the skills of his priestesses. There was little more to discuss, so Grace, Gloria, and Asuka all left, and the other council members began to disperse into small huddles of whispers. Edo retreated back from the group a few steps, allowing himself a moment of weakness to rest his forehead against his palm. His head hurt, and he felt so sick. He couldn't find enough composure to block out emotions, and he was starting to get leakage from behind the walls, too. He would need to go to the sanctuary and meditate for an hour or so after he had checked in with his patrols again. He wouldn't feel right until his god was where he was supposed to be, watching over them. This was honestly a nightmare that he wished he could wake up from. Paper tapped the back of his hand, and he blinked, letting his hand fall back from his face. He gripped the note instinctively, but when he turned around, Sora was already darting back into the shadows and around to the door without another word. Another report? He should have given this to him during the meeting. Edo unfurled the paper, squinting at Sora's messy handwriting. A sneaking, icy feeling wormed its way into his heart. What did this mean? Roger is up to something. Don't trust him. I'm going to investigate something. We'll let you know what I find. Edo's eyes lifted back to the room. Sora was already long gone. Edo couldn't grill him about this. Edo didn't like Roger either, but to accuse him like this, Sora could be executed for treason. What reason did Sora have to suspect him of something during this of all times? Roger was a political, power-hungry excuse for a high priest, but what could he be up to that would prompt Sora to say something like this? Edo's chest tightened as he realized all at once. Roger's already left the council. Another icy finger trailed down his spine. Where did he go? Roger took the first opportunity to leave that stupid excuse for a council behind, taking the entrance to the lower floors hidden behind the throne. What a farce. The boy had clearly escaped himself. Roger had thought as much as soon as the fire had begun to clear and the Emperor was gone. That stupid, pathetic little runt. He chose now of all times to grow a spine. Speaking of runts who had decided to grow a spine. Roger made his way down the narrow stairs, tapping the door open with the lock hidden in the vine carvings across the door. He closed it behind him and made his way down the narrow corridors. This part of the lower floor surrounded the ritual room, and it was locked off to anyone not within Roger's very particular circle. This was where they tested their experiments on controlling the demon during his episodes. So far, few had come to fruit. 5 years, and they were no closer to an answer that would put the raging demon under their control. They had only 6 more months, and the blasted runt had gone and run off. They were running out of time. And without blood, their weapons would start to cease functioning, leaving them more vulnerable to attack. Roger's lip curled into a snarl he didn't want to release, but he was so goddamn angry that he let it go anyway. He came to the door he was looking for and pulled the keys from his belt, unlocking them. At least he had some way to relieve some of this stress. He heard Dennis's ragged breathing as soon as he walked through, locking the door behind him and replacing the keys on his belt. "Well," he said, voice hissing in the tiny dark cell, "has some time alone softened you up a bit?" Dennis didn't answer. Perhaps he had blacked out while Roger was gone. The boy dangled by his wrists from the wall, wrists bleeding a bit from where the cuffs had cut into him. His shirt was ripped open along the back already littered with a multitude of welts and bleeding cuts. His forehead rested against the wall, and he gasped for each shuddering breath. "No answer, boy." Dennis cried out when Roger latched his hand into his hair and yanked him back, forcing him to look at him. Not unconscious then, Roger thought with some satisfaction at the sight of Dennis's wide, scared eyes. He released the boy's hair, and the boy slumped against the wall again, hanging helplessly. Roger had found him lodged between a pile of storage crates to shield himself from the firebomb. Suspicious, considering he shouldn't have known it was about to happen, or be anywhere near that vicinity at all. More suspicious that the firework remains Roger had found later were from a storehouse that Dennis had the key to. It had only taken a bit to wring the truth out of him, that he had been the one to set the bomb, and he had been the one to supply the runt with a smoke pill. Damn it all to hell. All Roger needed was a location or the name of a conspirator. There had to be someone that Dennis had communicated with to smuggle the Emperor out, or a place he had told the Emperor to go. That impudent runt had never been outside the palace walls. By all rights, he should have been snatched back up in a matter of moments. There had to be someone behind this. Roger picked up his whip again, cracking it once against the air just to see Dennis flinch. "Let's have it, boy," he said. "I can beat you for as long as it takes. Who did you communicate with? Who put you up to this? Were you in contact with the rebellion? There's no point in protecting them. They certainly aren't protecting you." Dennis didn't respond. He hung there silently, forehead pressed against the wall... . Roger snapped his whip over Dennis's back, drawing out a cry. Do you want to die that badly? He hissed. He hit Dennis again, drawing out another scream. And then Dennis actually laughed. It was a breathy, hoarse sound, but that was definitely what it was. "Joke's on you, old man," he whispered. "I've wanted to die for a very long time." Roger snarled and whipped Dennis again, making the boy writhe with pain. This was getting nowhere. He would have to turn to more drastic means of torture if he was going to get anything out of him. You can do whatever you want," Dennis said through heavy breaths. I don't have any idea where he is. He got away from you, all by himself. You is going to find the goddess, and you won't have your weapon anymore." That was about as much back-talk Roger could take from his servant. He tossed the whip aside and picked up a small black metal prong carved with demon sigils. He pressed it to Dennis's side and the boy screamed, writhing at the demon electricity that coursed through his body. Roger held it there against his bare skin for perhaps longer than he was supposed to. Well, if the boy suffered permanent damage, it wouldn't bother him in the slightest. He finally removed the prong and Dennis flopped against the wall, tears streaming down his face. "This is what you get for being brave, boy," Roger spat. "Do you think that runt cares about what's happening to you now? Do you feel proud of yourself, helping him abandon you?" Dennis didn't answer. He didn't seem able to. "Tell me where he is, or who he's with, and you can be spared this," Roger said. It was a lie. He would kill Dennis as soon as he had the answers he wanted. He had no room left for a disobedient servant. Dennis gasped for breath. "I can't tell you what I don't know," he mumbled. Roger grit his teeth. Then he pressed the prong to Dennis again and listened to his screams echo off the corners of the walls. He'd break soon enough.